Hello and welcome, Rhys here from the International Gamer Pubcast, and today I'm gonna go through my top 10 games of 2020. So let's get it out of the way first and foremost. What an awful year 2020 was for all of us. But one of its few comforts for me anyway was playing games, and luckily what a year for games it was. From long anticipated new console launches to indie sensations that came seemingly out of nowhere, 2020 for me at least ranks among the industry's best years ever. In fact, its lineup was so good that a top 10 alone won't cut it this year, so I'll be going through some honourable mentions as well. And kind of related to that, the pandemic's lockdown measures gave me a lot of new reasons to play this year, so not just for escapism like I kind of mainly was in the past, but also for socialising and killing boredom as well. So the games I played, and the ways I played, and therefore the ways I look at games, has kind of changed a bit. So before we get into the full list and even the honourable mentions, I just want to quickly kind of list off a few games that don't quite make the cut but deserve a nod nevertheless. So they are Astro's Playroom, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Carry On, thanks for that one JJ, Paper Mario Origami King, Call of Duty Warzone, Doom Eternal, Dreams, and Crash Bandicoot 4. Bloody hell, what a year. Honourable mention number 1 is Tell Me Why, chapters 1 and 2, which I played on Xbox Series S. So, remember Netflix dropped that Choose Your Own Adventure Black Mirror experiment? While it was a bit divisive, kind of loads of the TV critic sphere lauded Bandersnatch as the second coming of Christ, basically. But gaming has actually been using that format already for decades, and in better and more impactful ways to boot. So, Tell Me Why is the latest one of those from Don't Nod, the guys and girls behind the awesome Life is Strange series. And while Tell Me Why doesn't really push the boat with its gameplay from those previous games, instead it's the narrative that's really make it worth a mention for me here. So the story puts you in the shoes of two twins as they're unraveling the mystery of their mother's death, and one of those twins, Tyler, is trans. So of course the game has been blasted and review bombed by capital G gamers, bunch of assholes. For me though, Tell Me Why has kind of clarified transgender identity a little, touching on the transition process, how people might react, and a bunch of other factors I never really thought of. Honourable mention number 2 is Genshin Impact, which I played on PC and mobile using the cross-save feature, which actually worked pretty well. So let's face it, Chinese developers tend to copy a lot of concepts from the West and Japan. And Genshin Impact's a little bit different from those other China developed games though, as it's more of a console style adventure RPG rather than the more common mobile clones of popular Western titles. Hey there, Arena of Valor. However, Genshin still does pluck a bunch of other successful gameplay elements and mechanics from other games, which is no big deal if you ask me. So it's open world in the vein of Breath of the Wild, which again annoyed plenty of capital G gamers who for some reason seem to forget that the game's business is derivative. Even their precious Breath of the Wild copied mechanics from Assassin's Creed and Skyrim pretty openly actually. But the way I see it, Genshin gives non-Switch owners a chance to play a game like Breath of the Wild, an awesome game, for free, and that's pretty rad. Buyer beware though. Genshin was created for mobile and therefore operates under the predatory gacha model, so if you're kind of susceptible to those kind of mechanics, I'd point you towards Immortals Phoenix Rising instead, another Breath of the Wild style game on other platforms. It might be full price, but Immortals is mostly free of predatory monetization. However, it was made by Ubisoft, who has kind of been outed for a lot of sexism and racism, so also keep that in consideration. The final honourable mention before the full list is Fortnite, which I played on every platform under the sun this year. So, Fortnite's non-gaming events, brand activations and IP crossovers have been keeping Epic's Battle Royale phenomenon in the spotlight for years now. But that's not why I'm mentioning it. I'm also not going to say the word metaverse at all, because it's a buzzword that the industry is currently throwing about after any mention of in-game brand promotions, and we're not there yet, folks. Okay though, but the Mandalorian and Marvel stuff was right up my alley, and seeing the God of War himself twerk to Megan Thee Stallion's Savage is hilarious, but the real reason Fortnite is my most played game on PS5 this year, 70 hours and counting, is because it's given me a way to catch up with my young nephew. Now I live in the Netherlands, close to Amsterdam, and pre-pandemic I'd visit my home country of Wales every 3 months or so to catch up with my family, but of course Corona put a spanner in the works of that one, so now I just kind of jump into Fortnite every couple of days with my nephew to catch up with him, whether that's be to kind of like mess about in creative, kind of listen to him complain about the things his parents won't let him play and watch, or even every now and then actually play a couple of games. So yeah, it's a bit of a personal choice for me, but I loved Fortnite this year. So, on to the full list. 10 is Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I played on the PS4. Now, the original Final Fantasy VII wasn't my Final Fantasy, and to me it certainly isn't the pinnacle of JRPGs that many rose-tinted glasses would have you believe. Now, my brand of rose-tinted glasses point me towards Chrono Trigger, which isn't a Final Fantasy game but pretty much is, and Final Fantasy IV. That said, Final Fantasy VII was a seminal moment for the JRPG genre, and I still have plenty of nostalgia for it. There are some major issues with this 2020 remake though, which are kind of hangovers from the old game actually, like the terrible dialogue, the linear hollow feel in dungeons, which is actually a new thing, and of course a JRPG mandated dose of sexism and racism, which is sadly a trope of the genre, and it's unacceptable for 2020 if you ask me. Anyway, despite these issues, the remake's action-oriented combat, sublime soundtrack, it's amazing, and stunning visuals make it an unmissable experience for any action RPG fan. And needless to say, you know, if you have any nostalgia for the original Final Fantasy VII, you kind of need to play this game. Kind of seeing this desolate world in modern day visuals is incredible, and the sense of scale, it just kind of brings it to a next level. It's safe to say that the Sector 7 slums and Midgar now mirror the developer's original vision, and you know a remake's good when it manages to kind of emulate, recapture how a game looked to you when you were 8 years old. But, of course, buyer beware, this isn't a full remake of Final Fantasy VII, it's just the first part in a series, so don't go expecting that full story. They also changed some of the plot stuff, so look out for that too. And at number 9, we have Fall Guys, which I played on PS4 and on PC. So Mario Party without the annoying ass board game, using a Takeshi Castle template and Battle Royale mechanics. That's what Fall Guys is in a nutshell, and it's absolutely bonkers. The concept is straightforward enough so almost anyone can kind of pick up and play, and while its meme-making marketing machine was a major part of its success, I think the lockdown measures really pushed Fall Guys to the upper echelon this year. And Fall Guys was exactly what I needed back in August after the COVID-19 house party and Skype calls had long lost their novelty. So from August to November I played Fall Guys online with my Welsh mates every Friday while catching up over a few beers, and at times it almost felt like we were in the room together, so I'll always appreciate this game for kind of giving me that during those kind of troublesome first couple of months. And at number 8 we have Spiderman Miles Morales, which I was lucky enough to play on PlayStation 5. 2018's Spider-Man on PlayStation 4 was my favourite superhero game of all time. Swinging around New York never got old, the Arkham-style combat was so satisfying, and to top it all off, the narrative had one of the most refreshing takes on Peter Parker I'd ever seen. Now, the 2020 follow-up, Miles Morales, is kind of more of a standalone expansion, so think Uncharted Lost Legacy and Infamous First Light, but it still manages to improve upon the first game in every way. There are more tricks and abilities, making traversal and combat even better. The game takes place in winter, flaunting a whole new side of New York and Harlem, and Miles is just so likeable as a main protagonist. The story in this game is also a little more self-contained than that first one. It traces the titular character's pathway to becoming Harlem's own Spidey, which is a refreshing change from the save the world bullshit we've seen time and time again. And I played Miles on PlayStation 5, so the ray tracing, 60 frames per second mode, best in class particle effects, and 3D audio were kind of a good cocktail of next gen goodness for me. Also, it was refreshing as hell to see a black lead in a game, especially this year. At number 7 is Demon's Souls, which I also played on the PlayStation 5. The original Demon's Souls, the catalyst that kicked off the whole Soulsborne genre back in 2009. Now we've come a long way since then, so I was a little skeptical that this remake could kind of live up to the heights of Bloodborne and Sekiro. Turns out I had nothing to worry about. because From Software had hit a home run on their first swing apparently, as this Demon Souls remake stands toe-to-toe with From's latest and greatest. And while the original gameplay and foundation remains largely untouched, the developer, Bluepoint, has done an astounding job of bringing the visuals to modern day standards, just as they did with Shadow of the Colossus last generation. In terms of pure presentation, as you can see as you're looking at this video right now, this game looks better than anything else I've seen. I almost feel bad for those who would drop in like $1,000 on new graphics cards to play Cyberpunk. Almost anyway, those PCMRs, they like to make you know that they have the best hardware. But anyway, you know whether or not these kind of games gel with you, and this is just another kind of kick-ass one of those. It won't convince you if you're not a Soulsborne guy or girl, but I sure as hell loved it. Number 6 is Ghost of Tsushima, which I played on PlayStation 4. So, Sucker Punch out Assassin's Creed, and in almost every single way. Exploration in Ghost of Tsushima is more fun and fluid. Instead of overwhelming the player with a million map icons and HUD elements, Ghost of Tsushima takes cues from Breath of the Wild's amazing school of design. So, rather than robotically tracking markers and waypoints, you're actually following like the path of the wind, and this is where the particle effects really come into play. Like if you can't see the wind stream for yourself, you can use the direction of the blades of grass and the direction of a fire's embers as cues, and it's just so much more organic. You're not constantly going back and forth to the map, taking your eyes off the screen to look at a mini-map. And for lack of a better word, it's immersive than navigation options in other adventure games. Yet, Ghost of Tsushima's most standout quality is its presentation. The game's seasonal map makes insane use of the color palette and is hands down one of the best cases of HDR that I've seen in any medium, not just games. And Sucker Punch's rendition of feudal Japan is faithful, respectful, and simply stunning. And while some parts of the gameplay do feel a bit Xbox 360, every other aspect of this game is so refined that their shortcoming is pretty easy to overlook, and it could well be the best new IP of the generation. Number 4 is Animal Crossing New Horizons, which is actually gaming's biggest cultural phenomenon of 2020. End of. Like, picking up Among Us for free on mobile and playing a couple of matches is one thing, but mobilizing millions of non-gamers to buy a new console and play it for hundreds of hours just for one game, absolutely insane. And I've enjoyed Animal Crossing since the GameCube release, so seeing my friends, my girlfriend, and even my non-gaming sister playing it digitally alongside me this year has been heartening to say the least. Animal Crossing gave us all the means to socialize, shop, and explore during lockdown, without any sneaky microtransactions as well. Like, Nintendo can be backwards at times, but fair play on this one. And Animal Crossing's not going to be to everybody's pace, but with 200 hours on the clock, it was a much needed distraction during those early lockdown blues. And while I probably enjoyed playing Spidey, Demon Souls, and Ori more, minute to minute anyway, spending time doing chores on my mini island paradise undoubtedly had a more positive impact on my well-being, which was crucial for early 2020. At number 3, we have Hades, which I played on PC. So, it's the latest game from Supergiant, which extends their track record of isometric narrative combat games a la Bastion and Transistor. At this time though, like seemingly every indie game, they went down the roguelike route. I knew they'd nail the combat, Supergiant always does, but the narrative constraints of permadeath had me a bit worried. Again, not much to worry about. Without spoiling too much, Hades' narrative manages to neatly package itself around the die retry flow, and in classic Supergiant fashion, it's teeming with character and comedy. And now I thought I was a bit done with Greek mythology because it's been done to death across all mediums, but this spin on the Pantheon makes this ancient setting seem a little fresher. It really works. And the gameplay rocks too. Like every good roguelite, it's versatile and accommodates like loads of different play styles. And my go-to tactic in the end was using a combination of the fast fire bow and dash attacks, so I was basically zipping around the map like a psycho, spraying and praying. My thumbs will never be the same, but no regrets. Speaking of wrecked thumbs, number 2 is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2. Now, if there's one game that shaped, no, defined me as a person most, it's Neversoft's seminal skater romp, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. The game and its sequel single-handedly convinced a 10-year-old me to start skating, listening to metal and punk music, and watching skate documentaries. 3 things I still do 2 decades later. Now, real talk, Rural Worlds is not known for its progressive thinking, but this series actually helped put me in a good crowd of people and down a better life path. The remix kind of given me a means to relive the magic of those games that changed my life so much, to be honest. But now that soppy shite's out of the way, let's get on to the gameplay, which is great, it still holds up, it still has that insatiable just one more go vibe as well. And it has all the classic levels and characters I know and love, but also an extra thousands upon thousands of super difficult challenges, kind of goals like comboing across a series of obstacles from one side of the map to another, but there's also a bunch of new blood in the Pro Skater roster, which is refreshing to see as a fan of the lifestyle. And naturally the soundtrack is phenomenal as well. It's a cocktail of the older tracks, you know, like Bad Religion, Goldfinger, etc., and new stuff like Billy Talent and DZ Death Rays. And in what is perhaps 2020's biggest shock of all, this Tony Hawk game introduced me to Machine Gun Kelly's pop punk album, which ain't half bad. And finally, at number 1, we have The Last of Us Part 2. Now everybody saw it coming, it's my game of the year, it's probably my game of the generation. And there are so many different reasons for this, but let's get it out of the way. It had massive boots to fill, yet somehow it still manages to fill them then some and improve on that first game in almost all ways. So in terms of both gameplay and narrative, The Last of Us Part 2 raises the bar and merges its minute-to-minute gameplay with narrative in ways that I've never really seen before in any medium. But part of this is the tried and true environmental storytelling that put Naughty Dog on the map. The world is just so believable, it feels lived in, died in, and just like in that seminal first game, discovering the stories of survivors through left behind notes and other environmental trinkets really paints a picture of this bleak world. And complementing this established design principle is the screenplay itself. Like if you were to look at it on paper, it may just look like your typical cliched revenge plot, one we've seen countless times across film, TV, games, everywhere. The Last of Us Part 2 actually artfully connects you to the protagonists and the world in ways that aren't really possible in other mediums. Now, I can't really ruin it because it's a major story spoiler, but trust me, the way they kind of really connect everything together really works so well. As simply put, the game toyed with my conscience and morality in ways that I wasn't expecting. Nothing is as it seems, everything is a shade of grey, and everything you do, every choice you make will come back to you later, for better or for worse. Mostly the latter. And the game will stick with you for months and even years later, and honestly we'll be talking about it for decades. So there you have it, those are my top games of this year. Let me know on Twitter at IGPubcast if you agree or disagree.